Hello and welcome to Nothing But the Truth. Was India right to call off Foreign Secretary level talks with Pakistan? And where does it leave the relationship between the two countries? Those are the two key issues I shall explore today with one of India's most highly regarded former Foreign Secretaries, Shyam Saran. Mr. Saran, let me start with a direct question. Was India right to call off Foreign Secretary level talks with Pakistan after the Pakistan High Commissioner and because the Pakistan High Commissioner had met Hurriyat? Or do you think this was a disproportionate response?
I can only answer that question if I really know what is the context in which this particular decision was taken. Was this decision a part and parcel of some new kind of strategy which is being put in place with regard to relations with Pakistan, or is it part of what I certainly have criticized in the past, which is having a kind of a dialogue kind of a syndrome in India-Pakistan relations?
I'll come to the context in which this decision may have been taken. But first, let me ask you something. In 2005, when you were Foreign Secretary and General Musharraf came to India and met the Hurriyat, you were asked whether you thought that meeting was acceptable, and this is what you said. We are a democratic country. We have no problem with these kind of meetings. Have you changed your position?
No. As I said, I would like to know what is the context within which this decision was taken. Let me begin by looking at what happened with the swearing-in ceremony, where the heads of state of SAARC countries were invited and Pakistan was invited. Now, if you look at that particular decision, in the light of all that went on before, in terms of the BJP's posture, in terms of the statements made by the Prime Minister himself, if you remember that, we cannot have a dialogue while guns are booming or bombs are going off. This was a very clear departure from that particular position. Now, having taken that particular decision, which also invited criticism, I would imagine that the expectation would have been that we had now set in motion a different kind of dynamic in India-Pakistan relations. When the talks are to be held at the Foreign Secretary level in Islamabad, if you are reverting back to an established mold in terms of the relationship, then perhaps there is a sense that the assumption or the expectation that we are now starting a new dynamic, that expectation perhaps, maybe it was felt it was belied.
In fact, what you're saying, and I'm putting it in layman's language, is we've seen a series of what look like flip-flops, changes of position. In fact, to my mind, it might even be worse than that. It's not just that Mr. Modi broke with the past when he invited Mr. Nawaz Sharif for swearing in, because no one expected him to do so. But Mr. Modi then tweeted very warmly about their conversations at dinner.
Certainly.
They exchanged shawls and saris for each other's mothers. They exchanged warm letters. And finally, it was our Foreign Secretary that took the initiative to set up the date for the Foreign Secretary level talks. Now, when all of that culminates in the talks being called off, some people ask, was the Indian government leading Nawaz Sharif up the garden path?
No, I think the way to look at it, and I'm only surmising because I have no way of knowing what precisely may have been the reasons behind this decision, but I could certainly see a certain logic in a position taken by the government that there was a very conscious, deliberate attempt to commence with a new dynamic in the relationship.
Then why call it off?
Yeah, I'm just trying to explain to you. So, which is the reason why all the positive things you have mentioned took place. Now, when the Foreign Secretary level talks were being scheduled, the expectation could perhaps have been that from the Pakistani side too, there would be a departure from the established mold. And that is what perhaps that assumption was not in fact very valid.
I'll look at the view from the Pakistani side in a moment's time. Let me pursue one more time this argument that in fact were we leading Nawaz Sharif up, wittingly or unwittingly, up the garden path. Mr. Modi has repeatedly said that he wants to follow Mr. Vajpayee's Pakistan policy. Now, Mr. Vajpayee had no problem with General Musharraf meeting Hurriyat the night before the Agra summit. So did all this talk about consciously and deliberately following Mr. Vajpayee's path once again mislead Nawaz Sharif?
No, I don't think there is any misleading of Nawaz Sharif here. What I certainly believe is that this particular government certainly would like to convey to the other side or signal to the other side that there are certain red lines which must not be crossed. in taking the relationship forward. And I suspect that in taking this decision, a certain red line was being drawn.
The problem is, was it clear to Pakistan that a red line was being crossed? Was it clear to Pakistan that just as Mr. Modi had broken with the past by inviting him, by warmly tweeting over dinner, by exchanging presents for their mother, similarly, there was an expectation that Pakistan must break with the past. And I'll tell you why I asked that. Because successive Pakistani presidents, prime ministers and foreign ministers have been meeting Hurriyat since 1995, when President Farooq Lighari first did so. To suddenly expect someone to break a 19-year practice, and that too abruptly and arbitrarily, is perhaps an expectation too much. So did we expect too much?
Well, whether we expected too much or not, that's a different issue. What I'm trying to see is whether there is a certain logic to this decision being taken, in the light of the fact that it seems to be contradictory to
everything
the
else.
very positive things that have been happening at the starting from the swearing-in ceremony. The only way that I can explain this is that while there is an willingness to take this relationship forward, there is also an expectation that there must be actions taken by the other side,
a quid pro quo,
or that things which have been part of a familiar terrain in the past, we need to both move away from that. So if the expectation is that the Indian side moves away from what is an established terrain from before, and that the Pakistani side can always keep harping on what has gone on before, then we don't move forward anymore.
But once again, I want to come back and put this to you.
Yeah.
What the Indian side moved away from was actually its rhetoric. Rhetoric which regarded Pakistan as an entity that was simply inflicting violence on us, inflicting terror on us. How can you have peace talks when the guns are booming? It was a moving away from that rhetoric. In return, it seems we were expecting...
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think there can be no question of there being only rhetoric as far as cross-border terrorism is concerned, or there is only being rhetoric as far as violence from across the border is concerned. That is reality. I mean, to say that that is only rhetoric on our part, I don't think is correct at all.
Rhetoric in the sense that this was not the language we heard from Vajpayee or the language we heard from Manmohan Singh. It was a new formulation, right? What I'm saying is what they were expecting in return was, let me finish and then you can answer. What they were expecting in return was actually for Pakistan to jettison its given policy. After all, we know, Mr. Modi knows, the government knows that Pakistan has a moral and diplomatic commitment, so they claim, to the Kashmir cause. The talks with Hurriyat flow directly from that. If they had stopped talking to Hurriyat, they would have told the world they've diluted that commitment. Now, that can happen as an outcome of talks, but it can't be a precondition for talks.
Then why did Nawaz Sharif not meet the Hurriyat when he came for the
isn't that easy to answer? Because he came for a ceremonial, not a substantive visit, because he was actually building goodwill, and he saw it as a one-off.
Listen, if there are two prime ministers meeting, and it is of very highly symbolic importance, and it is projected as according a new beginning to the relationship, and if at that particular time he does not follow the normal mold of meeting the Hurriyat as he should have, and by the way, if you remember, there was a lot of criticism from the Pakistani side that he did not meet the Hurriyat when he came.
Which is why he couldn't do it a second time.
No. So if he made that departure, why not continue with that momentum? Because that was a signal to us, I presume, that he is prepared to move away from what was an established pattern before to do something different.
Let me reply to that. The External Affairs spokesman has made it clear, so I'm not revealing any great secrets, that in fact Mr. Modi or the government had explicitly asked Mr. Nawaz Sharif when he was coming in May not to meet Hurriyat. Mr. Sharif, I presume, agreed because A, it was a symbolic visit for a swearing-in, not a substantive visit. Secondly, because it was an opportunity that he was responding to. A warm invitation had come for the swearing-in. He wanted to respond equally warmly.
But why not
but he wasn't setting a precedent. He wasn't giving up policy.
No. Why not continue with that positive momentum? Because if he agreed that for making this particular visit and making the meeting between the two prime ministers a positive and successful exercise, he should not meet the Hurriyat, and he did not meet the Hurriyat. Why cannot you continue with that same
because
pattern?
that would have been taken to be a substantive giving up of Pakistan's policy, which he was not prepared to do. He was prepared to do it as a one-off, but not commit himself to a new policy.
I don't think you can justify that, since Pakistan is a stakeholder in the settlement of the J&K issue, that it has a right to meet the Hurriyat. I don't think that you can.
I am not saying they have a right, but it is a practice that has been accepted for 19 years.
There are several things that have happened in the relationship over the last several years. I am suggesting to you that there was a departure on the Indian side, but there was also a departure on the Pakistani side as far as some of the things normally associated with these meetings. Nawaz Sharif did not meet the Hurriyat when he came to Delhi for the swearing in. Why was it necessary to have this meeting just before the Foreign Secretary level talk?
So what you're saying to me is a very interesting thing. You're saying that there was a departure from the Indian side, and therefore there was an expectation there would be a departure from the Pakistani side. The fact, because Nawaz suggested when he came in May that he wasn't meeting Hurriyat, therefore we thought maybe he's established a precedent, and we felt let down to discover that what we thought was a precedent wasn't.
No, I mentioned to you right in the beginning that I'm not privy to what may have been the background to it. I'm just suggesting to you
that this could be,
that there was a departure on the Indian side to begin with. There was a departure from the Pakistani side as well. And this momentum, therefore, could have been built up into a much more positive trend in the relationship.
Let me come back.
If you are now saying, no, I'm sorry, did you see what happened when I came here and I did not meet the Hurriyat? There was a lot of criticism. Therefore, you should understand I have to go back to that. That means we are unable to move away from what is the familiar, sort of dynamic in the India-Pakistan relationship.
But the point that you don't accept is that, in fact, Pakistan didn't indicate a departure from its traditional commitments in May. It was simply a one-off gesture of goodwill in response to a warm swearing invitation.
I'm sorry, that is your interpretation.
That is Pakistan's interpretation.
The Pakistanis should not maintain that it is just a one-off.
But they do.
Why should they maintain it is
because it is in their eyes.
If it is a one-off, then what is the significance we can attach to that particular gesture? Nothing at all.
No, I'll tell you what it is. Pakistan's Prime Minister was under pressure from his army, as we believe, not to come at all, not to accept the invitation. Secondly, even after he came, he was under pressure not to hold talks the next morning, but to go back after the dinner. He decided not just to come, but to stay for the 27th to meet the Prime Minister as well. And therefore, he said, since I've got a warm invitation, which wasn't expected, I will respond equally warmly. This will be a goodwill gesture. Hopefully, this will establish a rapport between the two of us. He wasn't indicating a permanent departure from policy. It was a one-off. Did we assume too much?
The importance is of both sides having a stake in the resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir issue. There is no stake in terms of meeting or not meeting the Hurriyat. If it was a stake which Pakistan had, then I cannot see how Nawaz Sharif could have departed from the established pattern of meeting the Hurriyat whenever he comes to India, or when his foreign minister or other leaders come to India.
Let's not get stuck up over the word stake. This is part of their policy. It flows from their belief that they have a moral and diplomatic commitment to the Kashmir cause.
Why do you think that we should all the time accept what their policy is?
No.
Let us accept.
But can you expect a change in policy as a precondition for talks? That's what we've done.
I have said there has been a change in the posture that the present Prime Minister had adopted during the election campaign. There was an important positive departure made by him, to which I interpret Nawaz Sharif coming here, despite the opposition within his own country, the fact that he did not meet the Hurriyat, these are positive gestures on his part. Now, if that is the setting, then I would hope that from that setting onwards, we start moving to a much more positive momentum in our relationship, rather than keep saying, look, I have to go back because there is opposition here. Or because the army is putting pressure on me.
Can I put this to you? The departure from India's position, as I've said to you a moment ago, wasn't equal to the departure or the equivalent to the departure we were expecting the Pakistanis to make.
I'm sorry, Karan.
Mr. Modi just moved away from his rhetoric. We're asking Pakistan to move away from its policy.
When the government of India and the leadership and all across the political spectrum, everyone has said that cross-border terrorism is something which is certainly not tolerable, when we have said there is very little value in having a dialogue if this particular phenomena is continuing on the ground, or ceasefire violations are taking.
The last time a Pakistani was in Delhi was 2013. Between then November 2013 now, there's been no cross-border terrorism. So suddenly to believe that there's been an act over which we would have been reluctant to talk, you can't say it was just
I'm
rhetoric.
sorry, I think you are completely misinformed. There have been a number of cross-border incursions taking place. There have been incidents taking place in Jammu and Kashmir over the last several months, not only since November 13. So to say that the issue of cross-border terrorism is no longer relevant, I think that is completely.
So you're saying that what we were demanding Pakistan do is the equivalent of what we ourselves gave up. The two are equal.
What we have said is that though this has been our position, we believe that we must engage, we must start somewhere a new political dynamic, a more positive dynamic, and that particular dynamic was started by India by the invitation given to Nawaz Sharif to come to India for the swearing.
And they haven't reciprocated adequately.
They have not reciprocated adequately. They have not reciprocated at all, because you are not able to carry forward this momentum, because there are any number of excuses which can be given. Oh, Nawaz Sharif is under pressure. The army will not allow him to actually engage in a positive relationship with India. Oh, yes, there are proposals for increased trade between the two countries, supply of power to Pakistan, supply of petroleum products to Pakistan. But, what can we do? Even though the civilian government has agreed, the army is holding back. My point is that as far as India is concerned, we cannot go around, trying to see how we can change the dynamic or the equation between the military and the civilian.
That's not what I'm suggesting. You're jumping when you suggest. That's not what I'm suggesting. Let's take a break. Let's come back and turn to the consequences of the manner in which these talks have been abruptly broken off. How does that augur for the future? Also, what does it suggest about our government and our priorities? All of that in a moment's time after the break. Welcome back to Nothing But the Truth and an exclusive interview with one of India's more highly regarded Foreign Secretary, Shyam Saran, on the cancellation of Foreign Secretary level talks between India and Pakistan. Mr. Saran, let me put to you 4 consequences that flow directly from the way the Foreign Secretary level talks were abruptly cancelled. First, the MEA spokesman Saeed Akbari made it repeatedly crystal clear that the talks were cancelled not because of the many and escalating acts of violence on the LOC, not because of the ceasefire violations on the LOC, but because the Pakistan High Commissioner had met with Hurriyat. Now, doesn't that suggest that the Indian government can live with Pakistanis shooting at our soldiers, but they cannot accept the Pakistan High Commissioner having a cup of tea with Hurriyat?
No, I think you are over-interpreting the statement. I think you have to appreciate the fact that in terms of the what I mentioned as a positive gesture on the part of the new Prime Minister, that we should engage in a dialogue, and it is he who offered that there should be Foreign Secretary level talks. The expectation would have been that there would be a reciprocity in terms of maintaining,
which didn't happen. That's the old argument.
And even improving the atmosphere for these talks, because these talks would only succeed if a proper political environment
This is an argument you elaborated at great length in part 1. Let me come then to a second consequence of the manner in which the talks have been called off. Hurriyat is a pale shadow of what it was in the 1990s. There are many people who believe, in fact, it is an irrelevant organization. In which case, why break off talks because the Pakistanis are talking to an irrelevant organization? Now, in fact, you might have ended up boosting Hurriyat and giving it a fresh lease of life, which is clearly not in your interest to do.
I think the Hurriyat's status or Hurriyat's influence in the valley is quite irrelevant as far as this issue is concerned. We are not saying that the talks will not take place if you talk to the Hurriyat, because Hurriyat is either very influential or the Hurriyat is very irrelevant. I think it is the issue of, if our position is that Jammu and Kashmir is a domestic issue, you should not interfere in our domestic issues, then this particular action taken by the government of India is understandable.
Except it's not a domestic issue, because both the Simla agreement and the Lahore agreement recognize that it is a dispute which has to be sorted out.
But also the spokesman has said that the Simla agreement clearly says that the only two stakeholders in determining the future of Jammu and Kashmir and the settlement of Jammu and Kashmir
are the two governments. Hurriyat has no role.
No.
All right, let's come to a third consequence of the manner in which the talks were called off. Nawaz Sharif has been embarrassed. In fact, he's been weakened at a time when he was already embarrassed and weakened by political turmoil at home. But the problem is, this is the first Pakistani Prime Minister who came to power with a mandate to improve relations with India. Is it in our interest to weaken a man who wants to improve relations with us and is the first Prime Minister to win a mandate on those grounds?
Let me make it very clear. Any assumption on the part of India that Indian actions influence what the domestic dynamics in Pakistan are, I think is a completely invalid assumption. What happens to Nawaz Sharif? His political future is going to be determined by forces which are at work within Pakistan. What India does with Nawaz Sharif or does not do with Nawaz Sharif, I do not think is a very important influence on events.
Except that I wasn't suggesting we should tailor our action to influence the internal.
No, you are making it out as if we have some responsibility, for ensuring the survival of Nawaz Sharif. I'm sorry, that is not our responsibility.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm actually asking whether it is in our interest to deliberately take decisions that weaken and undermine a Prime Minister who's come to power wanting to improve relations with us. Is it in our interest to do that?
I'm sorry, I have to deal with the Pakistan that I have to deal with. It is not that I have to determine, whether or not, even if there is cross-border terrorism taking place, let's not react to it because, it is the government
behind it.
Then
don't fix talks at all.
It is the army behind it or the ISI behind it. Therefore, we should not react. What I'm trying to point out is that it is not our responsibility to try and see whether we can strengthen the civilian government.
But that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying.
So you are saying
you're misunderstanding or misinterpreting me.
Even in terms of your projection of Nawaz Sharif as someone who wants to, for example, encourage commercial relations between the two countries. Fact is that despite that particular desire on his part,
he hasn't
intention on his part, he is not able to deliver on that because there are very strong forces which are preventing him from doing it.
But what I'm asking
that is the reality. So why are we so hung up on trying to, to support
But that's not the question I asked. The question I asked is it in India's interest to weaken and embarrass a man who actually wants to improve relations? There are other ways of breaking off talks. You don't have to embarrass him. You can break off talks for other reasons.
It is nothing to do with this particular, personality or that particular personality. I have to deal with Pakistan, not Nawaz Sharif's Pakistan or the army's Pakistan or ISI's Pakistan.
Let me then.
As far as I'm concerned, I have to deal with whatever is in front of me. So if, for example, if Nawaz Sharif wishes to improve commercial relations, he is not able to deliver on that. That is the reality I have to live with. Not to say, oh, what a nice man. Okay. I'm sorry, he's not able to, deliver on this because there are other forces at work.
Let me then come.
I don't have the responsibility to ensure that Mr. Nawaz Sharif survives. That is his own responsibility.
Let me then come to the fourth consequence, and some would say perhaps the most important consequence of the way the talks were called off. By making not meeting Hurriyat a condition for talks, has the Indian government raised the bar so high that it's going to be very difficult for talks to resume without one government or the other actually now stepping down and changing its position?
But what makes you think that it's the Indian government which will step down?
What makes you think the Pakistanis are willing to?
Okay, I cannot predict what the Pakistanis will do.
What makes Mr. Modi think the Pakistanis are willing to?
What I'm saying is, what makes you think that is the Indian government which, like in the past, as I said, we have had this syndrome of dialogue, disruption, dialogue. I hope that this particular decision which has been taken will be maintained consistently. That is, if the next time round if there is an acceptance that yes, you can go and talk to Hurriyat and we will still have a dialogue, then there is something wrong with this whole exercise.
Except for the fact that you hope that the position the government has taken now is a consistent position, and we build it. Let me finish that answer. Let me finish.
Yeah.
The problem is that the position they took now was a contradiction of what they were saying and doing when they came to power.
No,
the messages they were sending out in May were different to now.
No,
There's a real flip-flop.
I'm saying to you that there is perhaps a signal. We are prepared to take our relationship forward, but there are certain red lines which cannot be crossed.
All right.
All right. If the red line has now been set, that any kind of direct contact with the Hurriyat is something which is crossing the red line, my hope is, and I may be proved wrong, my hope is that this particular posture will be maintained in the future also, because if there is again a contradictory position taken later on, then I think we are not really doing anything new.
We don't know what will happen and whether there'll be a contradiction later on. That's only speculation, so let's not get into that. But we've set a red line arbitrarily ourselves. If the other side doesn't accept it, then suddenly you'll find there are no talks possible.
You know, if you are making a red line, then you must be prepared to face the consequences
Which is
of
no
maintaining
talks.
the red
Which
line.
is no talks.
If the other side does not accept that.
So it's quite possible. There will be no talks in the foreseeable future.
It is possible that we may not be able to have talks for a considerable period of time. But my point is that as long as that particular position is taken as part and parcel of a larger strategy towards Pakistan,
okay,
I have no problem with a position where I say, look, these are my red lines. I cannot cross these red lines.
What it is this. It's now become a battle of nerves between the two. Can we stick by the red line, we in India, that we've set? Or will Pakistan say, sorry, we're not going to accept that red line? It's a battle of nerves between the two.
I will acknowledge that in the past, if we have put red lines, we have more often than not
backed off
from those red lines, which has been very damaging to India's position vis-a-vis
This is a
Pakistan.
test of Mr. Modi's will.
I'm only expressing an expectation.
Absolutely.
I cannot predict what will happen. But I would hope that if this particular decision has been taken, there is a certain consistency which follows from this decision.
Absolutely, I agree. And what I'm saying in response is that it also becomes a battle of wills. Who will duck first? Because if neither side ducks, we don't have talks.
Well, frankly speaking, even though the talks have been called off because of the meeting with Hurriyat, if I look currently at what is happening inside Pakistan, frankly speaking, any dialogue at this time, I cannot see how
but that's a
the
different
dialogue...
point.
No, I
That's a different
readily
point.
concede that that's a different point. But what I'm saying is that...
We don't lose if there are no talks for a while.
I cannot see how much has been lost in terms of, the opportunity
Except that sounds like a consolation to ourselves.
No, it's not
if
a
we think that
consolation.
we've boxed ourselves into a corner.
I'm just making an observation. I'm not really saying that this is a justification.
We've run right out of time, Mr. Saran. A pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.